Hello, I'm your host David Newsom, and welcome to Coated in Gold. Inspired by kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold, this podcast explores the fractured yet beautiful pieces of our modern lives. Drawing on my diverse career and deep curiosity about business and the philosophy of modern living, I dive into compelling stories and speak with high-performing, multi-dimensional individuals to uncover moments of insight and learning. So, let's get started. I am so excited to bring you this episode of Coated in Gold. This topic is near and dear to me and also serves as part of the inspiration for the title of this podcast. Today, I am discussing our life and tech. As someone who has loved being a participant, observer, and anticipator, I am so excited to dive into all things technology. I'm sure this will be the first of many episodes surrounding how we navigate technology as it relates to our daily lives, mental health, working practices, and how to foster a safe and healthy relationship to technology, especially for children. So to start off, I want to talk a bit about my journey with technology, how it has shaped me, and what I've been thinking about recently as my family is navigating technology around my child. Now, I don't want to start out too heavy and philosophical at the top when talking about technology in our society. But I have to start with a few chilling data points that have been impacting my current relationship with tech. When I was younger, there was this promise that advancements in tech were always going to improve society. That all these inventions inherently brought with them the promise of a better future. Now we're seeing doom scrolling, phone addiction, and absolutely untempered consumerism. In 2022, we produced 62 million tons of e-waste, according to the UN. That's up 82% from the previous decade. We are on track to raise that number another 32% by 2030. It's something I hadn't really considered before. As we go forward and I take you through some of the devices and technological advancements that impacted me, I can't help wonder, what happened to it all? Certainly I didn't hold on to all of it, otherwise my home would probably be filled with tech trash. I also want to touch briefly on the topic that has been at the forefront of conversations around technology recently, AI. At a TED conference, I was introduced to Tristan at the Center for Humane Technology. You might be familiar with his organization for producing the documentary, The Social Dilemma. The Center for Humane Technology is intensely focused on codifying tech ethics and providing guidance to schools, families, and the government with resources to ethically and safely manage our relationships to tech. So anyway, Tristan has been presenting recently on AI and comparing the rapid expansion of AI to the atom bomb and the Manhattan Project. He says that half of all AI researchers, 50%, believe that there is a 10% or greater chance that humans could go extinct from our inability to control AI. And yet AI continues to roll out rapidly. I have to confess that I have been an early adopter of AI. When ChatGPT was first launched, I was one of the first paid subscribers. Elicit, Perplexity, you name it. I am on all of those platforms. Microsoft rolls out Copilot, boom, I'm paying $20 a month for this. And before you know it, I have a whole collection and a toolkit of AI tools at my disposal. I've also seen the infiltration of AI in my field as a marketer. Canva really quickly started introducing tools, AI tools, into the Canva platform. You see it everywhere. In my own business, we use Notion as a platform. Notion, AI, like boom, okay. Google Workspace, Gemini, yeah, paid for that before it was rolled out to the general public. I had to test it all out for myself because I love this stuff. Is it an addiction? I wouldn't quite go that far. I haven't lost house or home trying to buy tech, but it might be on the borderline. Or at least once upon a time, it certainly was on the borderline. I also want to point out that AI has been in our lives for a lot longer than it's been a popular topic of conversation. Autocorrect is an AI that has been there since Clippy. Remember that little annoying guy at the bottom corner of your screen? We all deal every day with those annoying text word suggestions. When we're trying to type a curse word, for example, and you're fighting with it. No, I did not mean duck. I think we didn't really notice it all until we put names and voices to a lot of the AI we see, and then the rollout of more generative AI. Siri, for example, on my iPad, right here, is listening. In fact, I actually don't want Siri to do anything. Go away. We all have these smart assistants sitting in our homes. I'm not sure how smart they really are, especially anymore, but they're there, always waiting for you to say their names, ready to perform simple tasks. It's an interesting arc we've been on. We haven't reached ubiquity with generative AI in our daily lives, but the acceleration that we've all been feeling was prompted in 2017, when the disparate fields of speech recognition, speech synthesis, robotics, and image generation all came together and started using a shared language model. These are all fields that had been quietly developing individually for a while, and as they started speaking the same language, it was like poof, an explosion. And now AI is a part of our regular lives whether we want it or not. It's also in our children's lives. I'm lucky that my son is too young for this, but as a dad, I'm worried about the implications for him growing up. Some of you are probably familiar with the app Snapchat. Well, 100 million of its users are under the age of 25, and a significant portion of that group is under 18. So, they recently incorporated a ChatGPT chatbot that children can confess anything about their lives to, and it has no real responsibility to keep your children safe with the information it retains or provides. And there seem to be no rails on the apps to regulate the activity of their young users. And look, I don't want to come off like I wasn't also young and diving headfirst into any and all new tech. I'm not here to fearmonger. In fact, over the course of my life, tech has brought me immense joy. For me as a young closeted, bullied Mormon kid, technology was an escape that provided me a whole new world away from what I was dealing with in my real life. My history with tech is long. My very first gaming system was a ColecoVision, and my very first computer was a Commodore 64, both released in 1982. And while I played games with my siblings on the ColecoVision, I was really in love with the Commodore 64. I delved deeply into the components and a massive manual that taught me how to program at what the time seemed like cutting-edge stuff, and is now just the basic expectations for how a computer should work. I programmed simple question and answer interfaces, got it to print the screen, generated motion graphics. Imagine the days of dot matrix printing graphics. They made this insane sound. I'll play a clip for you here because if you haven't heard it before, it'll blow your mind. And if you have, you'll be thrown immediately into the past. Recently, I was doing a search for past Sears Wish book, catalogs. And thankfully, there's a website that actually has them. And I was showing my son, hey, take a look at this. This was my Commodore computer system. And look, you could buy the monitor. And then the actual computer itself was actually built into the keyboard. And over here is a disk drive. And oh, here's the dot matrix printer. And I was looking at the prices in the 80s. If you tallied this whole thing up, it was almost $1,000 for 64K. So now this is something else I want to highlight, is that the Commodore 64 was called that because it had 64K of storage. Yeah, 64K. My current iPhone has a terabyte. It's not difficult to find hard drives that have several terabytes. 64K is less than one high-quality selfie. But in the 1980s, I was growing up in rural upstate New York. And for probably the first 8 years of my life, the biggest piece of technology in our home was the telephone. And long distance was costly. You didn't just pick up the phone and call grandma and grandpa in another state and talk for 3 hours. You just didn't do that. You'd have an insane phone bill. But I was always looking for ways to connect with the world. I was curious in how other people live their lives. Jumping ahead a bit, when I was 14, I got my general class ham radio license. For that, you needed to know Morse code. Yes. At a high word per minute rate. You needed to understand radio wave propagation and how radio waves travel around the world so that when you were building your setup, you would be able to connect properly. I had a tube transceiver and I built my own dipole antenna, which consisted of two very long spans of wire. Because we lived out in the country, I strung it up from one of the eaves of our roof to a tree. In the middle, there was a coaxial cable, like you might currently have in your wall for cable. That coax cable would come down and connect to my ham radio. Initially, I plugged my radio into the wall, but I eventually switched to a battery because you would hear the hum of electricity on the line when you were talking to someone. By the way, the battery was basically a car battery. It was a car battery, in fact, in a plastic tub under the desk that my ham radio was on. When I wasn't using the radio, I would charge the car battery. All of this allowed me to call CQ, which meant that I was open to conversation with anyone else connected. I think the farthest person I connected with was in Juneau, Alaska. So imagine, a 14-year-old kid on the outskirts of a small city in upstate New York talking to people in Alaska, Oregon, Halifax, Nova Scotia. After you talked with someone, you would exchange information so you could send each other postcards with your calling card on it. It was a huge point of pride for me to run to the mailbox and collect a new postcard. Even with the more rudimentary technology available to me back then, I was able to find connection. This only increased as the internet and mobile phones came onto the scene. When I was 18, before I went on my mission, I had a job selling pest control, and I took that money to buy an early cell phone from Cellular One, which is now AT&T. The plan was about $375 a month, and not in today's dollars, but decades ago. To be clear, my family did not have a lot of money, and I certainly wasn't earning enough to sustain that kind of monthly payment. But I loved having a cell phone and being one of the first people I knew with one. And it didn't work well. It dropped calls all of the time. There was static when I would get through to someone. But for the first time ever, I could stand on a cliff, watching the sunset on the Pacific Ocean, and talk to someone on the other side of the country. After I came back early from my mission, I was still pretty closeted. I was working in retail. And if you've ever been through the trials of a retail job, you know you forge a family-like bond with your coworkers. Because you're working off hours from everyone else in a 9-to-5, they are often the only people available to spend time with in your free time. Well, my group of coworkers would go over to someone's house, and we were young people, so the boys and girls would be flirting and kissing, and where was I? Yeah, that was me, on my friend's computer, dialing up into AOL. Yeah, that sound. I would use my friend's account, hey, sorry to him, by the way, to join gay chat rooms. And it was the very first time I connect with other people just like me. It's really hard for me to describe the exhilaration that I felt at the very first time connecting from a very small place to a world that I knew was very, very big and to then connect with people like me. It was almost like magic. Now, it would still be a while before I truly came out, but it was hugely influential in enabling me to move through the world authentically, or at least somewhat. As the internet became more accessible, I got a Sony Web TV. And I don't know how many people know about this device because it was quickly replaced with better home computers and internet service. But anyway, it was a box, connected to my TV that dialed up exclusively into its own web TV network. But you could add on AOL communities for an additional cost. Of course, I shelled out the $300 for it, and that's how I met my first long-term partner. I would also play web games like Second Life that allowed me to find intimacy in anonymity. The world was warming up a bit to gay people, but it still didn't feel safe to actually be affectionate in public, so we found safety in connecting online. As portable tech took off, I had an AOL communicator, basically a device before texting was available on cell phones that let you chat on the go. I even imported a Bluetooth headset from Germany, not so much because I needed it, but because it felt like an accessory that allowed me to stand out as I moved from retail work to working at a law firm out of college. Far out now from the days of my Commodore 64, tech was becoming cool. Apple had laptops in a wide variety of colors. Flip phones were solid and substantial. I also wanted a Vertu phone that could be ordered from the Neiman Marcus catalog. They were weird and outrageously expensive. And then of course came the iPhone. And while there's still some excitement in the newest advancements, it feels like the tech joy has died down, at least for me. Nowadays, I have the newest Apple products, but I've grown dissatisfied. I think we all have found that the promise of connection that tech once provided is now actually interfering with the ability to connect in our real lives. And I'm not trying to be David Downer. I'll touch more on this in the next episode, but having work and politics and arguments and a million mind-bending pieces of content no longer makes tech an escape. Now I'm married, I have a child, and the community I was seeking is right in front of me, and it's hard to be present with them. Having a child of my own has also radically shifted my perspective on how kids should relate to technology. The dangers of a 14-year-old using a car battery to power a ham radio feels so small in comparison to the potential dangers that my child could encounter with unfettered access to the internet. I've been trying my best to establish good habits with him and keep him engaged with books and toys, and we really only break out the iPad on long flights. Even then, we still try to set the amount of time he can be locked into the screen. I fear what is on the horizon, though. We are trying to keep our son offline for as long as possible. But as children's lives, their social lives, are increasingly online, I wonder about if he'll eventually be left out. This is increasingly a place where kids go and be social. I don't want him to be in a crowded room when everyone is in a device but him. For now, my son's only real engagement with the internet are supervised educational videos. And I fully recognize how much more engaging videos can be when trying to get your kid interested in a new subject. Every once in a while I've slipped and let him see some age-appropriate but slightly annoying, silly internet videos. And it astonished me when I was in the car and he was quoting the Honey Badger Don't Care video. I don't know what it means for us that something he's seen once could so immediately imprint on him. It makes me all the more conscious of how my social media usage rubs off onto him, even if I keep him away. You have to admit, the Honey Badger Don't Care video is pretty funny. I want to maintain hope that technology will change our future for the better, but we seem so far away from the joy that we all once experienced. I think the answer is somewhere in trying to find boundaries between daily life and the flurry of notifications that make staying present so difficult. Personally, I've taken steps to eliminate notifications once I'm done with work and only allowing the most important people in my life to contact me off hours. It seems small. It's probably still not enough to fully break the addictive cycle of modern technology, but it's a start for now. I'm really curious to hear from all of you about your relationship with technology. Has it changed over time? For parents, how are you navigating your child's relationship with tech at each phase of their lives? I would really love to hear stories about the successes that parents of older children have had with establishing healthy habits around the internet and your kids' social life. Thank you for listening to Coded in Gold. I've been your host, David Newsom. You can follow the podcast on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and anywhere else podcasts can be found. Take care.